They started digging in autumn, when the ground was still soft enough to argue with. People noticed, of course. Nothing in a valley that small went unseen for long. Especially not a widow and her aging mother hauling tools past the edge of town and disappearing into a hillside with a purpose no one quite understood. At first, it was curiosity. By the second week, it was laughter. Wood-drying tunnel, Jonas Hale said, leaning on the fence line with two others. Now I've heard everything. Below him, on the slope near the river bend, Eliza Hart moved steadily with a shovel, cutting a clean line into the earth. Her dress was pinned back, sleeves rolled, hair tied tight at the nape of her neck. Dirt streaked her arms. She didn't look up. Beside her, her mother, Margaret, worked slower but no less precise. She used a smaller spade, shaping the trench edges, reinforcing the cut with wooden planks they'd dragged from an old shed. They think they'll dry wood underground, one man said, shaking his head. Jonas smirked. Maybe they planned to heat the dirt. Laughter rolled across the fence line. Eliza heard it. Of course she did. But she didn't stop. Because she wasn't digging for them. She was digging for winter. The first week had been the hardest. Breaking the surface layer. Mapping the slope. Figuring out where the water ran when it rained. She tested the ground with a rod first, checking density, looking for pockets that might collapse. Then she marked a narrow line along the hillside, angled just enough to drain moisture away from the interior. Not straight, Margaret had said that first morning. Eliza nodded. Nothing about winter is straight. So they carved it with intention. A low tunnel at first, just tall enough to crawl, then wider, then braced. They set thick timber beams every few feet, salvaged from an abandoned cart and a collapsed barn roof. Between the beams, they packed clay and compacted soil, smoothing the walls to reduce seepage. At the entrance, Eliza built a simple door frame with a slanted roof to divert rain. Inside, she laid down a bed of gravel and straw to keep the ground from turning to mud. They worked from sunrise to dusk, hands blistered, back sore, but each day, the tunnel extended deeper into the hillside. By the third week, it reached nearly 20 feet in. That's when people started stopping to watch. Not to help, just to witness what they assumed would fail. Jonas came down once, boots crunching gravel as he approached the entrance. "You planning to sleep in there too?" he called. Eliza wiped sweat from her brow and leaned on the shovel. "No. Then what's the point?" "To keep wood dry." Jonas laughed outright. "You keep wood dry by stacking it under a roof. And when the roof leaks?" Eliza asked. "It won't. It already does." That quieted him for a moment. Then he waved it off. "You're digging a hole in the ground. Water runs downhill. You're building a puddle." Eliza met his eyes, steady. "Water runs where you let it." Jonas shook his head. "You'll see." He turned back toward town, still smiling. Eliza watched him go, then stepped into the tunnel again. Inside, the air was different. Cool. Still. Not damp, as people expected, but steady. The deeper they dug, the less the outside weather mattered. That was the point. Margaret handed her a plank. "Back wall needs reinforcing." Eliza took it. They set it in place together. By early November, the tunnel was complete. 30 feet long, wide enough to walk through, reinforced with timber ribs. Shelves built along both sides. At the far end, a narrow vent shaft rose upward through the hillside, capped with a simple hood to keep snow out while allowing moisture to escape. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't visible from a distance. But it worked. They began hauling in firewood immediately. Fresh-cut logs, partially seasoned stacks, anything they could gather before the cold set in. They arranged it carefully along the shelves, leaving space between each piece for air to move. The vent shaft pulled moisture upward slowly, while the earth around the tunnel kept temperature stable. Within days, the difference was clear. Wood that would have taken weeks to dry above ground began to shed moisture faster. Margaret ran her hand over a log one evening. "Lighter already," she said. Eliza nodded. "Less smoke, too." That mattered. Wet wood didn't just burn poorly. It filled a room with smoke, stole heat, and wasted effort. Dry wood burned clean. Hot. Efficient. They were building more than storage. They were building control. Winter came early that year. The first heavy snow fell before the last leaves had dropped. Cabins across the valley lit fires day and night. At first, people felt prepared. Woodpiles were stacked. Chimneys cleaned. Doors sealed as best they could manage. But then the second storm came. And the third. Temperatures dropped hard. Then harder. What became the problem no one talked about until it was too late. Stacks that had seemed dry in autumn revealed their truth in flame. Hissing, smoking, barely catching. Fires needed constant feeding. Rooms filled with smoke before they filled with heat. People burned twice as much wood for half the warmth. Jonas felt it first. He stood in his cabin one morning, staring at a fire that refused to stay alive. The logs spat and smoked, edges blackening without truly catching. His wife coughed from the corner. "Open the door," she said. "If I open the door, we lose what heat we have. You're already losing it." He cursed under his breath and kicked the log into place. It cracked weakly, still damp, still useless. By the end of that week, the valley understood the problem, but understanding didn't fix it. They had no time to reseason wood, no way to dry it quickly, no solution, except one: the tunnel. Word spread quietly at first, then louder. People began walking past the Hart hillside more often, not laughing now, watching. One afternoon, Jonas stood at the entrance, arms crossed. Eliza was inside, stacking another row. He cleared his throat. Wood actually drying in there. Eliza didn't turn. Yes. How fast? Fast enough. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Mind if I see?" Eliza paused, then nodded once. "Watch your head." Jonas ducked inside. The air hit him first. Not cold, not damp. Steady, clean. He looked at the stacked wood along the shelves, then reached out and picked up a piece. Lighter than it should have been. He knocked it against another. A sharper sound. Less moisture. He frowned. "That's not supposed to work this fast." "It does here." "Why?" Eliza gestured around them. "Earth holds temperature. Air moves slow. Moisture rises." Jonas stared at the vent shaft, then back at the wood. He didn't laugh. Not this time. He set the log back carefully. "You built this for winter." "Yes." He nodded slowly, then stepped outside again, eyes lingering on the hillside. For the first time, he wasn't seeing a hole in the ground. He was seeing a solution. But winter wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Because the storm that came next didn't care about preparation. Only survival. The storm announced itself with silence. No wind at first. No snow. Just a strange, heavy stillness that settled over the valley like something waiting. Old men noticed it. Animals did too. Then the sky changed. By late afternoon, clouds rolled in low and fast, swallowing the ridgeline. The first flakes came sideways, thin and sharp, carried by a wind that seemed to arrive all at once. By nightfall, the valley disappeared. Snow didn't fall. It attacked. It drove itself into walls, under doors, through cracks men had sealed and resealed all autumn. It buried fences, swallowed paths, and erased everything familiar. Inside the cabins, fires burned hard. Too hard. Wet wood hissed and spat, filling rooms with smoke before heat could build. Chimneys struggled to draw. Drafts reversed. Doors froze to their frames. People fed logs constantly. And still, the cold came in. At the Hart hillside, the storm struck differently. Wind hit the slope and broke upward. Snow slid past instead of piling deep at the entrance. The tunnel door rattled, but it held. Inside, Eliza stood near the stacked wood, listening. The air was steady, dry. The faint pull of the vent shaft still moved moisture upward, even now. Margaret sat on a low stool, wrapping a blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's worse than the others," she said. Eliza nodded. "We stay inside tonight." Margaret looked around the tunnel. "What about the house?" Eliza didn't answer immediately. Their cabin sat lower on the slope, more exposed. "Good enough in mild weather. Not in this. We can't heat it," Eliza said finally. "Not with what we've got." Margaret followed her gaze to the stacked wood. "All dry. All ready. All in here." She understood. "We sleep in the tunnel." Eliza nodded. They moved quickly. Blankets carried in. Lanterns set along the wall. A small iron stove they'd used for testing was brought to the center and lit with the driest wood from the shelves. It caught immediately. Clean flame. No smoke. Within minutes, warmth spread through the tunnel. Not overwhelming, but steady and reliable. Outside, the storm roared. Inside, the air held. They sat together near the stove, listening to a world they could no longer see. Hours passed. Then came the first knock. Faint, almost lost beneath the wind. Eliza stood. "Did you hear that?" Margaret nodded. Again, this time louder. Eliza moved to the door and forced it open against packed snow. Jonas stood there, half buried, face white with frost. Fire won't hold, he shouted over the wind. House full of smoke, kids can't breathe. His eyes flicked past her into the tunnel. Warm light, dry wood, then back to her. The tunnel. He swallowed. Please. Eliza stepped aside without hesitation. Bring them. Jonas didn't waste another second. He turned and vanished into the storm. Eliza shut the door and braced it. Margaret was already moving. Clear the back wall, she said. Eliza nodded. They shifted stacks, made space, laid blankets along the driest section of the floor. The stove burned low and steady. No rushing, no waste. Just heat that stayed. Minutes later, the door opened again. Jonas returned with his youngest in his arms, wrapped tight, but still shaking. Behind him came his wife and two older children, faces raw from cold. They stepped inside and stopped. Every one of them. The change was immediate. No wind. No smoke. No biting cold. Just warmth. Jonas's wife closed her eyes for a moment, as if her body didn't trust what it felt. Boots off, Eliza said. Wet things by the door. Stay low near the stove first. They obeyed without question. The youngest child was placed closest to the heat. Eliza handed Jonas a piece of wood. Feed it slow. It'll hold. He stared at the clean burning log. No hiss. No smoke. He nodded. Warnocks came. Mrs. Carter. The Miller boys. Old Rowan. One by one, they arrived, drawn by desperation and the one place in the valley that could still offer what they needed. Not just shelter. Dry fuel. Inside the tunnel, space filled quickly. But it held. The earth walls kept temperature steady. The vent shaft pulled out moisture and stale air. The dry wood burned clean and efficient, needing far less than the valley's wet piles. People rotated near the stove, shared blankets, sat shoulder to shoulder in a space that had never been meant for this many. No one complained, because for the first time in days, they weren't fighting the cold. They were winning. Jonas sat near the entrance, staring at the stacked wood. I laughed at this, he said quietly. Eliza didn't look at him. I remember. I said it was a hole in the ground. It is. He shook his head. No, he said. It's the only place that works. Margaret gave a small, tired smile. Winter teaches quickly. Outside, the storm reached its peak. Wind howled so violently it shook the hillside above them. Snow packed against the door. Somewhere in the valley, something large collapsed, with snapping underweight. Inside the tunnel, children slept. Men sat in silence. Women whispered softly to keep fear from rising again. The stove burned low and held. Hours passed. Then morning came, not with sunlight at first, just a quieting. The wind eased. The snow slowed. Eliza opened the door carefully. A wall of white stood beyond. They dug their way out together, hands numb, breath visible, until finally, the valley revealed itself. Changed. Cabins buried halfway up their walls. Roofs sagging. Pads gone. Smoke thin and uncertain. People stepped out from the tunnel and looked back. At the entrance. At the slope. At the place they had laughed at for weeks. Jonas stood beside Eliza, shaking his head slowly. You didn't just build storage, he said. No. You built survival. Eliza looked across the valley. I built what winter required. The days that followed were filled with recovery. Digging out homes. Clearing roofs. Checking on those who hadn't made it to the tunnel. But something else happened too. People came back. Not for shelter. For answers. How deep did you dig? How do you vent it? What kind of wood works best? Can it be bigger? Eliza and Margaret answered everything. Because they understood something, now the valley finally did too. Knowledge mattered more than pride. By the time spring began to thaw the ground, new tunnels appeared along the hillside. Some small, some crude, but all built with the same idea. Drywood first, peat second, survival always. Jonas stood one afternoon watching men dig where he had once laughed. He looked at Eliza. Strange thing, he said. What? Everyone copies what they once mocked. Eliza allowed herself a small smile. That's how people learn. By summer, the valley looked the same from a distance. Cabins, fences, fields. But beneath the ground, everything had changed. Because they had learned what winter never fails to prove. The smartest shelter isn't always the one you live in. Sometimes, it's the one you prepared for when no one believed you.